One day, he carried off a young girl, the daughter of a surveyor of Frosinone. The bandits' laws are positive. A young girl belongs to the first who carries her off. Then the rest draws lots for her, and she is abandoned to their brutality until death relieves her sufferings. When their parents are sufficiently rich to pay a ransom, a messenger is sent to negotiate. The prisoner is hostage for the security of the messenger. Should the ransom be refused, the prisoner is irrevocably lost. The young girl's lover was in Cucumetto's troop. His name was Carlini. When she recognized her lover, the poor girl extended her arms to him and believed herself safe. But Carlini felt his heart sink, for he but too well knew the fate that awaited her. However, as he was favorite with Cucumetto, as he had for 3 years faithfully served him, and as he had saved his life by shooting a dragoon who was about to cut him down, he hoped the chief would have pity on him. He took Cucumetto to one side, while the young girl, seated at the foot of a huge pine that stood in the center of the forest, made a veil of her picturesque headdress to hide her face from the lascivious gaze of the bandits. There he told the chief all, his affection for the prisoner, their promises of mutual fidelity, and how every night since he had been near, they had met in some neighboring ruins. It so happened that night that Cucumetto had sent Carlini to a village, so that he had been unable to go to the place of meeting. Cucumetto had been there, however, by accident, as he said, and carried the maiden off. Carlini besought his chief to make an exception in Rita's favor, as her father was rich and could pay a large ransom. Cucumetto seemed to yield to his friend's entreaties, and bade him to find a shepherd to send to Rita's father at Frosinone. You ever sit across from someone at dinner, in a meeting, in a podcast studio where you have a co-host, and as you are trying to make a point, tell a story, relay some information, you just notice their eyes start to glaze over. You realize you've lost them. You are looking at an empty vessel, a computer doing internal calculations and not receiving any external input that you are providing it. I can't speak for Franz and Albert, but at this point in Pastrini's story, I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? What are you talking about, Pastrini? We're not even talking about Vampa anymore. Now we're talking about Cucumetto and Carlini. Ay, ay, ay. Not that this isn't exciting. I mean, we have, we used to talk about the prestige movie we're making, and now this is suddenly turned into a cartoon. I don't know if it has to do with the kind of caricatured nature of Pastrini telling a story within a story, but Cucumetto I'm picturing as like a Bluto from Popeye, some sort of bombastic, oversized character that is just going to brutalize everyone that comes in his path and crosses him. Or maybe I prefer to put the cartoon filter over it so I don't have to actually engage with that. First part about what the bandits' laws are when it comes to basically cavemanning a young girl. Ugh, not something that is easy to read or wrap your mind around. I mean, I guess it doesn't luxuriate in it. But still, this whole passage today has to do with how bandits essentially took what they wanted, including women. Aren't we excited by this exciting story? I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be dismissive of the story itself. Mostly, I'm nervous to keep your attention. I feel like my commentary is suffering because I can't connect it to the larger story of Monte Cristo. But some of you know what's happening. Some of you who have read this story before know exactly what's going on, what all of this means, where it is all leading. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of people reading the serialized story. I can imagine back in the day, if you missed one or two segments, like, you would be really lost right now. I get what we discussed earlier about being able to respond to your audience week after week, changing your story. The serialized nature allows you to be a bit more dynamic and flexible with the genre of your story. But this is like, oh God, I missed I missed the chapter and a half when Franz got really high and came back to Rome. Suddenly I'm like, what is this? Cucumetto? What's he have to do with Luigi Vampa? And what does Luigi Vampa have to do with Franz? And what does Franz have to do with Dante? So let me take a step back. Like, let's step out of the story for a second and just ask very generally, what do you think the story within a story accomplishes here? I don't know 100% because I don't know what the point of Pastrini's story is yet, but more broadly, what does a story within a story, not this story within the story, because I can't comment on that, but a story within a story, what does that do? I'm going to think of a proxy to this. Like, have you all seen the movie Memento? I won't spoil that, but there is a story within a story there. Guy Pearce, who plays a character that has memory issues, has tattoos all over his body because he loses his short-term memory and basically has to orient himself to his world amidst an investigation into the killing of his wife. And he tattoos his body, but he has this thing that he keeps saying, remember Sammy Jenkins, remember Sammy Jenkins. And Stephen Tobolowsky plays this character of Sammy Jenkins in this story within a story. I'm not going to call it a flashback because it's not that. But when we watch that module of the story, it operates on a thematic level outside of, like, okay, let me be more specific. It allows the story to introduce certain themes, an understanding of the rules of a world, I guess, before it attaches them to a central figure. So we learn Sammy Jenkins, apparently in the story, is someone who also experiences the memory issues that Guy Pearce is experiencing. Again, I'm not going to go into the specifics. If you haven't seen it, I don't want to spoil it, but we see through Stephen Tobolowsky's story a potential consequence of what could happen to someone with this memory affliction. So it introduces potential stakes, suspense, tension, an understanding of how something could happen. So if we're applying that here, could it be that some part of Pastrini's story about Vampa and Cucumetto is going to teach us something about the world, how it operates, the potential consequences of actions? Is this going to be like a revenge thing as Cucumetto is taking Rita away from Carlini? Is that going to show some sort of proxy to Dante's situation of what vengeance and bloodlust can lead to? Is the story within a story a proxy for the themes that could potentially happen to Dante eventually? Dante's nowhere to be seen here, so I don't know exactly how that's going to affect him, but maybe it's meant to affect us, the readers. And I guess in doing so, it can introduce the ideas of themes that the main story might not be ready to state yet. Again, using Memento, we have the story within a story that sets up circumstance and consequence between Sammy Jenkins and his wife, and introduces the idea that what we, because the story within a story, just like the main story, is told in these segments, these vignettes, and not everything is revealed to us all at once. And so with each vignette, we learn a little bit more and eventually come to learn that our initial perception might not be the full story, which is what eventually plays out over the course of the movie and the main story. But it's introduced in a smaller way and kind of primes us as audiences to be ready for that in the main story. It makes the main story feel more inevitable than it would otherwise. It could risk seeming contrived or exaggerated or unbelievable. I guess what it does is it makes us as audience members a bit more educated to the calibration of the story, makes us a little less naive going into whatever big reveal the main story is going to do, because we've had a smaller taste of it before then. So, okay, I'm glad we talked this out. Again, I recognize that this is me talking it out and you having to witness it. But for me, that makes me a bit more easily invested in what Pastrini is telling us, because this is priming us as readers to learn something about the big themes of this story that is going to be remarked upon later. Maybe. But that makes sense to me. So, with that said, let's go into tomorrow's episode and see how Carlini gets this ransom out of Rita's father to pay Cucumetto. Join me here tomorrow. Okay, goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.